And we're back. This is the Colombia Calling podcast. I'm Richard Mccoll. As I said previously, this is episode 528. Incredible as it seems. This week's very special guest, I believe, is I don't know, are you in Brooklyn or in Washington? But it's Sean Mattison.
I'm
Where
in
are
New
you,
York.
Sean? You're
I'm
in
in
New
New York.
York. All right. Sean Mattison is a documentary maker of some repute. And why have we got him on? Well, there's a few things that are close to my heart. He's done documentary about Argentina, of course, there. He's done one about Guatemala, where I lived as well. I've been out here a long time in the Americas. And, well, most recently, in my knowledge, he did the documentary on our president in Colombia, Gustavo Petro. It's entitled Petro. And I just think it's a fantastic opportunity to talk about, I think, the man behind the controversy. So welcome, Sean, on the Colombia
Thank you.
Calling podcast. Um, tell
Thank
us,
you very
tell
much.
us the background. You're most welcome. Tell us a bit of the background. You've really focused. You're very young, of course. You're a documentary maker. This is great. You tend to focus on sort of, I would say, more socially aware documentaries. Certainly, in what I've seen on your website, and so you're driven to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think from an early age, I was influenced by my parents, who are my father is a photographer and my mother is a writer, and they both care deeply about human rights and have a longstanding engagement with Latin America. And when I first started traveling in South America, South and Central America as a teenager, and later in my early 20s, I really had my eyes opened by a lot of the social inequity and sort of the history of economic oppression that has existed for hundreds of years in the hemisphere, in different ways, and it manifests differently in different countries. But there is sort of a broken social contract throughout Latin America that you could argue dates back to 1492. So I think that one of the things that I've endeavored to do with my films, the ones that focus on Latin America anyway, is to reveal certain things about the social or political conditions particularly to a North American and global audience who might not know very much about it. That's not to say that my films don't also focus on other issues and take place in other
Yeah.
countries, but Latin America has been a focal point for me from an early age.
Yeah, I mean, there are a mix of things, but I would say very impacting are the topics that have been chosen in Latin America and, places close to my heart, which brings us to the crux of this conversation, the documentary Petro. I mean, first and foremost, how did you get access to him? Because he's not the most overwhelmingly friendly person towards journalists and so on. So how did you get in?
I've actually found him to be fairly gracious with journalists who are doing
Cool.
their job responsibly. Um, but I originally met Petro in 2007 when I was a college student. I had gone down to Colombia with a friend of mine who went to Tufts University, who knew Petro through his own family, and I met Petro at a time where he was really struggling with. Well, he wasn't struggling with, but he was doing a lot of important work highlighting human rights violations that were taking place in Colombia, particularly as it related to the assassinations of social leaders and people who were affected by paramilitary violence. And so, not having known very much about the situation in Colombia, I learned very quickly that there were a lot of really tragic things happening, and Petro seemed to be one of the people most vocal in terms of blowing the whistle about those human rights atrocities. And so then, years later, when he decided to run for president for a third time, and it seemed like his polling was favorable, I called my same friend who had originally introduced us all those years ago. And I said, do you think you could get me back in touch with him? Because it may be an interesting moment to follow this historic campaign, and it would be, the first time that a left-wing government would take power in Colombia. So that was sort of the spark, and then it grew organically from there. And I went and met with Petro in person in September of 2021 and pitched him the idea, and he was sort of lukewarm about it initially, and then when he realized that we were serious and that we were planning on following the campaign closely, for the better part of a year, he sort of reluctantly accepted.
It's the personal introduction and having met him in 2007. I'm trying to think. 2007 is he broke the false positive scandal. In
Right.
that, I mean, he was very involved in getting that out then. I mean, I think
Yeah.
as an opposition congressman, senator, and then becoming mayor, he was very effective
Yeah.
in those. So you got your permission to be with him for a year, more or less. I mean, obviously, he had the final say on where you'd be with him and when, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was not unfettered access. Of course, I would have loved to have had more access. I feel like his campaign team in particular were could be tricky to deal with because they were always very focused on prioritizing, the radio and TV, which were they knew that we were doing a longer term project that wouldn't come out until after the election, and so for them, we were
Sure.
sort of the last priority because their main priority was to get out the vote and to focus on making sure that he was doing, radio appearances and TV interviews and getting eyeballs from voters.
Yeah, sure. I mean, win the election is the get him out there.
That was their priority.
So tell us. I mean, the day to day following him. What's he like? I've interviewed him once, and
Mhm.
in the 40 minutes I was granted, I got an idea, and I've been following him for some time. But what was he like? I mean, because we have to talk about Gustavo Petro, put him into context for those people who don't know. First ever leftist president in Colombia's history, a former M19 guerrilla, spent some time in jail and then was amnestied and worked diligently as an opposition figure through the formal channels, up through Congress, the Senate, mayor, ran for president on the third occasion, was successful. But he's as divisive, and obviously he should not be in the same breath, but he's as divisive in Colombia as I would say Trump in the United States. You either hate him or you love him, really. So, I mean, what was it like to be in his presence for such a long period of time?
Yeah, I mean, he is incredibly polarizing. Sometimes I even wonder how it's possible to hate him as much as people do, just because the perception abroad or in other places is that he is a leftist, but he hasn't necessarily become what the right wing was saying before the election, which is that he was going to drag the country into oblivion and he would be the next Hugo Chavez or Fidel Castro. And so I think a lot of their talking points have sort of fallen away, and now they've just been happy to kind of block his reforms wherever they can and try to neutralize his government as much as possible until the next election, when I know that the right hopes to retake the government. But I think in terms of what he's like, he's very different, but in different moments. When he is behind the scenes, when he's on stage and giving a fiery speech, he's obviously very animated and vocal and can be sort of almost go on the attack. And when he's behind the scenes, he tends to be very pensive and cerebral, and quiet. And he often, will just sit and listen to what everyone else has to say, which is something that people used to say about Obama. Everyone assumes that he's this fiery person who talks over other people, but that's really not the case at all. I mean, I think he has a high opinion of his own assessment of a situation, or usually I think probably believes that he's right. But to say that he doesn't, his opinion is not informed by listening to others would be a misguided perception. So I think, um, he tends to be very guarded and very private. And I think that probably comes from his days as a guerrilla. Even when they had the campaign Zoom calls that were leaked back during the campaign and the chusadas, and they had all his staff and various people had said different things on those calls. You'll notice that Petro didn't really say anything on those calls, not because he necessarily had anything to hide, but because it's more that he tends to sort of sit back and listen until he decides to say something. And usually when he decides to say something, it's on Twitter or, to somebody in his inner circle. But I find it, he's sort of a chameleon. He's not any one, personality at any given moment. I think that depending on who you are and at what mood he's in, he can be very fascinating to talk to because of his command of history, his clear passion and love for the country. I think that one thing I used to say even to his political opponents is "Él tiene la mejor voluntad para el país." I really actually believe, whether he's an effective president or not, that he really cares deeply about Colombia and wants to change it for the better.
Well, I believe that I've had interviews with academics from all over the world, and I am a host of another podcast for a company in London, England. One of the academics, called Professor Jenny Pierce, who is an academic of some repute. I think she's an investigative professor of Latin American studies at London School of Economics. She says, I know she comes from a background too, more a liberal background. She's an academic, but she just says, I genuinely believe that at the center of everything, he means to do well. He means well for Colombia. And I mean, there's a lot of, and I'll say it outright. It's highly probable that there is a media campaign to ensure negative news surrounding him, and he doesn't help himself particularly in that front by making, like outbursts on Twitter or X or whatever you call it these days. He doesn't help himself by doing these things and sometimes jumping the gun. And I had the honor of working for him for 12 days until I was ushered out when he was mayor of Bogota. And it was clear that he wasn't good at delegating. And so that kind of gets into the point of what you say. He listens to everyone and then does what he wants. But that said, I'm curious as well about the man behind this mask. As you said, good fiery speeches. He's a good orator. Just look at that inaugural speech in the Plaza de Bolivar. It was, phenomenal, and that will be quoted for years to come. And when he gets up and speaks, you want to listen. But I'm also curious, because you were there for so long, what's he like in a family setting with his own family, his kids, and Veronica Alcocer, his wife? What's that relationship like?
Well, I mean, when we were with him in private with his family, was truly when I felt like he was his happiest. He's a very doting father, clearly loves his kids. Also I could say the same for the attention he pays to Veronica. And so,
Mm.
I think that it was actually when he was most relaxed when he was at home, and when we found him during those moments, for example, the long sort of master interview that I conducted with him that is in the film was at a moment where it was right after the consulta in March of 2022, and he was in pretty good spirits because they had done well the night before. And so I really felt like when he was at his best was when he was at home and feeling relaxed and feeling like things were going well. And when I saw him most stressed out were sort of when he was keeping up with his punishing campaign schedule and going to 3 cities a day, and stealing a few minutes of rest in the car between destinations. I mean, I don't think any other candidate during that campaign went to even a tenth of the places that he went. He was really committed to traveling and trying to convince voters to vote for him during that time period. But I think that I think his family really grounds him, and clearly the situation with his son has been a difficult one in terms of the legal um, situation that he's been embroiled in. But I don't even know what the current status of that is with the Fiscalia. But overall, I mean, I think it holds him together.
Yeah, that the scandal, I would say was the money coming from untoward funds, untoward
Yeah.
sources to
Mhm.
the campaign, I suppose, of Petro's campaign via Nicolas Petro, who is his son from a first marriage. I imagine that really hurt him. I imagine that it stung, but that was post the election that it came out, or was it already coming out when you were with him?
No, it was after the election, and
Yeah.
I don't believe
Mm.
that Gustavo Petro knew anything about what was going on there, and I also don't know, what the extent of that whole situation was in terms of, was there entrapment by Nicolas Petro's ex. She clearly
Mm.
had a deal going on behind the scenes with Semana Group. So I mean, it's there's a lot of aspects of that investigation that seems strange to me, but I don't think that it's even worth me offering an opinion on any of that, because it's up to the Fiscalia and the Attorney General to decide,
Of
whether
course.
he's guilty or not. And Petro has been vocal from the beginning about,
Mm.
saying that he'll respect the rule of law about his son's fate. So we'll just have to see how that plays out going forward.
And rightly so. Rightly so. It should be in the hands of the Fiscalia. It should be in the hands of the judges, and it's the rule of law. If Nicolas is found guilty, then so be it. I
Yeah.
mean, that's. I would hope that that's always the way. And there are a few more points I want to go through in the documentary itself.
Yeah.
You were there filming when there were gunshots on his car in Cucuta.
So actually, we were not filming that moment. That was from
Mm.
2018, and that video was taken by Gustavo Bolivar on
Okay.
the
Yeah.
former senator, on
Mm.
his cell phone. And
Mm.
so, but we used that moment to demonstrate kind of the history of all of the threats and sometimes near assassinations that have that have happened in Petro's life. And I think,
Mm.
he's spent decades dealing with that, and I think it's sort of almost second nature to him now to have to deal with that. But I think during the campaign there was a real fear that something could happen, and I remember speaking to him in that long interview and him saying, I want to win this election to ensure my safety and my family's safety as well. So he clearly didn't feel like the campaign was a very safe time for him, because he was going out and doing all the campaign stops. And we need look no further than the assassination on Trump from a couple of days ago to know that that kind of political violence is still very much a possibility, even in the so-called first world. Uh, you know, um, so for it to happen in the developing world is almost an afterthought, and it has happened many times in the past in Colombia, which the other thing that we emphasized in the film was the number of leading left-wing candidates who had been assassinated in the past. So that was certainly a harrowing moment, but we can't take credit for filming that.
Oh well, I was wrong on that one,
I'm
but
glad we
it's still.
weren't the ones to be
Yeah.
filming that in any case.
But were there any scenes that were said, Petro's or Petro himself or his team said you can't use that because I mean,
No,
were there an
they didn't they didn't even see the film until it was finished, so they
okay.
didn't have any editorial input. It was all our own independent project. And actually, one of the weirdest or most difficult things about putting this film out in Colombia were the number of accusations that came out
Ah,
saying that it was paid for by the government or that it was propaganda. And the irony of that is that, we had to really fight to try to raise money for this, to make this film and do it independently. And I feel like we maintained, a level of ethical and journalistic integrity that I try to maintain with all of my projects.
mhm,
But one of the things that we had to try to sort of fight against in terms of the PR aspect when the film came out in Colombia was that somehow this was paid propaganda, which is absolutely not the case.
hmm. Yeah, I mean, I saw a piece in the La Silla Vacía, so the well-known online outlet, and it really does accuse you of propaganda and so on. And I'm not sure it is, but did you had a conversation, you had an interview with that journalist, right?
Yeah, I spoke with him. I believe that there is a tendency to sort of be opportunistic about uh, those conversations among certain members of the press in Colombia and in the U.S. And I would have welcomed a sort of
Mm-hmm.
more open debate about that aspect with him, but everyone's going to have their opinion, and all we can do is just try to do the work with the most integrity that we can.
Sure. Now, you interviewed one of uh, I will say openly, my least favorite politicians, whom I have had the opportunity and the good fortune of being able to appear on a international news panel as an opposing voice to her. We were both invited onto TRT News, so as an international channel out of Turkey, to discuss the peace accords and so on. And fortunately, I was able to, and I'll say this outright and with no modesty whatsoever, but I was able to kind of clean the floor with her. Um, but you were able to talk to Maria Fernanda Cabal. And
Yeah,
I'd like to know how that went.
it went well. I mean, I got in touch with her through her team, and I basically explained that we were making a documentary about the election, and I wanted to hear her take on the different candidates, and particularly I knew that she how much she disliked Petro, and I reached out to a number of opposition
Mm,
politicians, including Álvaro Uribe and Federico Gutierrez and others, and I got turned down by a lot of people, but in her case, she at the very least accepted the interview, and she has her opinions, and
mm,
certainly she knows how to get attention in the press, and has been very critical of Petro. So, what I wanted to sort of show the other side of the coin, which is this far right ideology, uh, which has been pervasive in Colombia, but she may be its most sort of vocal proponent to date. So it was important for me to show that existed and that it is a very strong current that continues to pick up steam in Colombia.
Well, I would
To use
say
a
at
mixed
this
metaphor.
moment in time, yeah, I would say at this moment in time, she's perhaps, before anything's been done, she's one of the front runners for 2 years from now. I mean, she's definitely mobilizing, and she's got the backing, with, of course, with her husband as as a big figure as well. She has
Yeah.
a big support swell, and she knows how to present herself, and she knows how to talk, and that comes across as well in your interview. She presents herself very
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean,
interesting one, that one.
she went to university in the U.S. She has a very, not that there aren't incredible universities in Colombia as well, but what I mean by that is she's very connected to sort of her political allies in the rest of the world, and has an international sort of network and education, and her ability to, like you said, deliver her message is pretty uncanny. And I give her credit at the very least for her ability to grab people's attention. Certainly, she had mine during the course of the interview.
Did you did she get in touch after the documentary came out?
No, I haven't heard from her team.
Okay.
I can't imagine that they would like the film very much. I guess because maybe, but I don't think that it paints her in a bad light at
No.
all. If anything, for people who dislike Petro, she sort of comes across as the hero in this film.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I would say so. I would say definitely. What before we get back onto Colombia, the how is the reception of the documentary overseas internationally?
it's been quite good. We had a number of positive reviews in the United States when we premiered at Slam Dance in Park City, Utah, where we got an honorable
Hmm.
mention from the jury for the documentary prize.
Mm.
And we also screened at Morelia in Mexico,
Hmm.
where the Mexican press was very interested in the film, and we also presented the film at the Havana Film Festival in Cuba, which was fascinating in its own way, given
Mm.
sort of the legacy of the communist government there. And
Mm.
so, I think that internationally, the reception to the film has been very good. And then in Colombia, we had our theatrical run at the Cinemateca in Bogota back in April, and that was really
Hmm.
um, powerful because of the sort of range of reactions that it generated, but also people coming up to me and thanking me for making the film, feeling like the story hadn't been told in this way almost ever. And so I think this film and the film Igualada about Francia Marquez sort of kind of are almost accompany each other in terms of trying to tell a story about the last few decades of Colombian political history, but from a different perspective.
When you were with him, did he ever discuss any of his like cornerstone policies? Like, I mean, obviously, I'm pushing it past total peace. Did he ever discuss this with you?
When we were on the campaign trail, the thing that he most spoke about when we were together were climate change policies. And that
Hmm.
has been sort of the hallmark of his political ideology for a long time. He was an early proponent of trying to move away from fossil fuels and into a more sustainable future. And so when we were spending time on the campaign, I felt like when he wasn't talking about those other major issues, he was really mostly focused on climate change. And I think that he has had varying degrees of success with his climate change policy. I can't speak really to the details of that because, I haven't followed it as closely since he was elected. But I will say that I can't imagine it's easy for any government to implement reforms with the level of resistance that he's in Congress and the Senate, and also with all of the attacks from the news media. So um, we'll see what the next year and a half, 2 years holds. I don't know. Yeah,
It's a tough one. It's a tough one. He's just had a positive bump because of the getting through the pension
the
reform.
pension reform. Yeah,
One kind of hopes that he might be able to build on this. For me as a journalist, it is exhausting because he produces so much news.
right.
um, I, I'm also interested if when you were with him, did you feel like sometimes when he gets on Twitter or he gets up on stage that he's deliberately poking the bear and needling the opposition, trying to get a rise out of them? Because sometimes it feels like he wants that conflict.
That's possible. Um, I mean, I can't pretend to know what his motivations are or whether poking the bear is a sort of strategic thing or
Mm,
whether it's a spontaneous thing that's more emotional. I mean, you could ask the same questions about other political leaders who tend to be, when Trump tweets spontaneously, is it really spontaneous or is it based on a
mm,
strategy that only he sort of knows behind the scenes? So it's hard to say how calculated it is. I mean, certainly there have been times where Petro has tweeted about something, I would say precipitously, and then it's generated a negative reaction very quickly or a big backlash. And so there are times where I think, in the case of any leader who takes to an X account too quickly, it's sort of like, is it doing more harm than good? That's sort of a question, I guess.
I like, you were recording, you were following, and did you feel that the success of the documentary really was, did you feel that when he won, you're like, this now we have a great product? Did you feel relieved?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think if he had lost, I had a contingency plan to make a different type of film because we had
Hmm.
followed a number of political and social leaders around the country for the better part of a year and a half, and so I did have sort of a quote unquote backup plan. But I think him winning at the end, did feel like the ending that we were looking for. Um, and it would have been interesting, a Rodolfo administration in retrospect. You wonder how different it might have been because Rodolfo was an outsider candidate and he didn't sort of belong to that Centro Democrático party apparatus. So it would have been a very sort of unexpected, um, Colombian government. I think, even as maybe as different as this one has been, but in different ways. So, I think, yeah, I mean, the feeling of him winning, it felt like, at least for us, some kind of release. Um, from the whole process, just because I always envisioned the film ending after the election as opposed to continuing to film after he took office.
But it would have been powerful as well, to have got at the, let's say, the um, acceptance of defeat, and
Yeah,
like another week with him as he sort of plots, because when he lost the previous election against Ivan Duque, and he'd still got the highest amount of votes that a left-wing candidate had ever got in history. He,
yeah,
from day one, he knew he was opposition. That was it. He was going to run again in 4 years. I think it would have
right.
been fascinating to see an evolution again, like, because I mean, for my money, he believes 100% that he represents the government of change. And so, therefore, this
Yeah,
would not have been completed without him running again afterwards.
He did say that he wouldn't run for a fourth time if he wasn't elected
Right.
in the third attempt, which of course you could argue that maybe he would have changed his mind, but I do wonder if after the third time he would have then pivoted to sort of trying to support someone like a David Rasero or a younger politician. But we'll never know because he did
No.
win the election.
Yeah.
So,
He's
and he, I believe, if correct me if I'm wrong, he's term limited, so he can't
yes.
run again this time.
He is term limited, and I think he's talked about the constituyente and a way of perhaps trying to change the constitution. I have great doubts that this would go through. I think even his supporters, a large portion of them would be against that. There's a reason it's in place. And I don't think it's a very wise thing to do. Rather than try and do your best, therefore you can get, let's say, a successor elected on a platform as well of change. I'd say that that's the best, the best case scenario for him right now. But I just think it would have been fascinating to spend that year with him. And has there been contact as well since you released the documentary?
Actually, believe it or not, no. We were trying to meet with him when we screened the film in Bogota, but I think he was busy running the country. I don't have any hard feelings about him not necessarily following up with us, but I do know that he's seen a cut of the film and said that he liked it. And I think in general, he's going back to him being sort of a private person. I think it's awkward for him to kind of see himself on screen. And he even said as much in a post on X where he said, it's strange to feel like I'm watching a story about myself when I feel like I haven't achieved my goals or something along those lines. So, I think maybe if I hear from him 5 or 10 years from now, that might actually be better than hearing from him this year.
That's cool. That's cool. Well, I mean, my fear is, and despite the things that he's pushed through, and there have been successes, and what he desires to push through, my fear is that anything that is is good for change and could change the lack of equality in Colombia, a far right-wing government comes in and undoes it immediately, and we are left with a government that has been symbolically important rather than actual projects on the ground. And that's my greatest fear, is that we are left with 4 years of again sort of treading water, which is what we had under the previous government before that. I mean, they weren't wanting to do very much. And so I think it's very important to see the documentary. Will it be coming out on any of the platforms,
Yes.
any of the screening platforms?
Yeah, we signed a distribution deal in the United States with a company called Global Digital, and we are preparing the film for rollout on all of the major platforms like Amazon Prime, Google Play, Tubi. So it's been sort of a process. We were busy with the festival circuit in the spring, and we signed this deal a couple of months ago. But it sometimes it takes a maddeningly long time to get these things sorted out. Luckily, I think by the end of ideally by September it'll be available.
Okay. Well, it must infuriate you to see how many documentaries, how many true crime documentaries are out there, and you can't get yours out there. We seem to be inundated.
Well, we're aware of the pressures of the market in terms of documentary films, and I think we were really blessed to be supported by a handful of executive producers who put some funding into this project at a time when other more traditional sources of funding were not necessarily trying to take a gamble or roll the dice on a political or a film about the political situation in Colombia. So yeah.
So finally, I will wind this up because I know you're a busy guy. But what's your next project?
I'm working on a couple of different things right now. I'm very interested in climate change and sort of water scarcity in different parts of the world. And I also have a couple of sort of more other types of ideas for episodic or TV series. So I'm trying to sit here in Brooklyn and write treatments for new projects. But I'm actually going to be back in Colombia in 10 days, which I'm excited about. So I will be in Bogota and possibly Medellin after that. I somehow Colombia just keeps pulling me back in.
There's too much here. If you're going to be doing climate change and water scarcity, head straight to the Guajira. I mean, we need it. Yeah. We need more international exposure on the situation there. Well, I may or may not be in Bogota in 10 days' time, but if you're free for a coffee, I'd be more than happy to invite you to one.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for this opportunity to chat about Petro, about Colombia. It's been a fascinating run, and this film was sort of it took over my life for a year or two, and to look back on it now and be able to talk about it with the gift of hindsight is a really interesting conversation to have. So thank you.
You're most welcome. We've been talking to Sean Mattison, documentary maker. He made Petro. There have been other, of course, documentaries that he's got out. You can see all the links on his website. It's just SeanMattison.com, I think.
That's correct, yeah.
Yes, SeanMattison.com. It's no, I think it's pretty good. So of course, we'll put the link to the website in the show notes, and of course, you want to get in touch with him, you can get in touch with him that way. One final thing: have you had a lot of haters online?
I would say there's been a handful of negative reviews on Letterboxd and some angry messages in my Instagram DMs, but overall, you just sort of, at least it's better than if people didn't care or were apathetic. I'd rather have haters than not generate a reaction. So I think that we can handle that.
Well, I got unfollowed by someone yesterday who said that I had to stop promoting the narco-corrupt left-wing agenda. So, but
yeah,
it's what it is.
You get a range of reactions, and it's like I said, it's better to be relevant than not. So,
all right.
Anyway,
well,
thank
again,
you so much.
Yeah, thank you for your time. This has been a great conversation. This has also been the Colombia Calling podcast, episode 528. You want to support the podcast, please go to patreon.com/Colombia Calling. And up there, you can sign up and pledge some cash. Of course, Emily Hart, who does the Colombia briefing, you can follow her on Substack as well. And all of her articles go up there. She's written for the New York Times, amongst other, the Times, the Telegraph, etc. Delayed Gratification magazine as well. So follow her for excellent, rigorous journalism. I've been your host, Richard Mccoll, here in Monpos, Colombia at the moment. That's why I'm sweating here on camera. Now I can turn it off, have a glass of water, and mop my face. So thank you, everyone, for listening, and goodbye.